welcome to the Heartland Connection. This is Zach Waller, the Executive Director of Hayuvel, your host, coming to you guys straight from the Heartland of Israel. Lots going on around here. The pruning is happening. It's so amazing to see these guys just really digging in and getting their work done and connecting to the land and to the people and to God, really, as they're here performing this incredibly prophetic task of pruning these vines. It's just so amazing to see their faces light up. They're, when they hear the Bible stories and they're sitting there looking at the exact location where it happened, or, these different places. It's just incredible thing to experience it, and it kind of helps me to relive it when I'm seeing other people, experiencing such amazing things too. Then I get to, remember the first time I saw it, and then, gain something more. And every time I go to these places, we were just at Elon Moreh, and it's just such an incredible thing to stand on the exact place where our father Abraham stood and receive the promise from God. I mean, it's just incredible, amazing thing that we could be privileged, and that God would have mercy on us, that we'd be able to have that opportunity in today's time. It's amazing. We also made a big announcement this week in Hayuvel circles. We have, for the last 10, I think actually 11 years, we've had an event called Family Week. And we've always done it at Ken Lake State Park in Kentucky, and it's been amazing every year. I've actually grown to have up to like 700 people show up at this event that we do during the Feast of Passover, Pesach. We gather for a whole week, for the whole week of unleavened bread, and it's been an incredible, every year for the last 11 years. It's been an incredible time, just fellowshipping with one another. And then we have lots of teachings about family, how to strengthen family foundations in order to make families productive in today's world for God's kingdom, and also to learn about Israel and the family-Israel connection. So this last week, we actually made the announcement that Family Week will be moving from Kentucky to the Missouri base. So we're going to be doing Family Week at our facility in Missouri. So if you're interested in coming to Family Week, be sure and sign up for our email list. It's probably the best way. We'll be sending out information about registration, that stuff, very soon. But that'll be really, really huge. There's a lot of reasons why we decided to move it, but I think it's going to be really, really an awesome thing to actually have it on our Hayuvel campus. So we're doing all kinds of things to prepare for that and to host this huge event there. So we're really excited about that. We're also receiving applications for all of our events throughout the summer and fall, for the harvest, for the programs going on then. The Recognize Jerusalem trip over Shavuot here in the land of Israel is going to be amazing. So that's kind of looking out a little bit into the future, but I guess by the time you guys are listening to this podcast, we'll have celebrated Tu B'Shvat, which is basically, biblically, there's a tax sort of thing that would happen with your fruit. You have so much fruit, and then you would give so much away. And a lot of this was developed, Israel developed as they came into the land and started figuring out how all of these things work. But so basically, this Tu B'Shvat became like basically the day that the agriculture started to sprout again. Things started to come back. It's traditional to plant trees, that kind of thing, because you're basically just starting to enter into the springtime in Israel, when things are really greening up after all the rain that we've had since Sukkot. And it's actually really amazing right now. We look at it, everything is just super green right now in the mountains of Israel. And so that's where they celebrate this Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the month of Shvat. And basically, with that tax I mentioned, everything that's grown from now until next year at this time would be included as 1 year. that would be given at a certain time, and then that's kind of how the year cycle is. It really can be a little bit complicated and confusing because there's several different New Years for the Jewish people observe. Obviously, on Passover you have the month of Aviv, and biblically that's what the beginning of months. But then counting the Shemitah cycles, you actually start from Rosh Hashanah, and so it's kind of a whole big study. I encourage you to go and look into all that. But there's several different New Years that the Jewish people celebrate, and they all have different biblical foundations. So, jumping into the Torah portion, we are in portion Yitro, or Jethro, in Exodus chapter 18 through chapter 20, and it's really, really another very amazing Torah portion. Last week we were studying about the dividing of the Red Sea and the Israelites coming across. This week we're studying about Mount Sinai and the glory of God coming down in such a miraculous and dramatic way, and the children of Israel receiving the Ten Commandments. But before that, then this portion's titled Jethro. We hear from Jethro. All of a sudden, Jethro comes into the picture here, and says that he hears about all of the amazing things that are happening, that have happened with Israel being set free and from Egypt. And it says Jethro rejoices, and he's so glad to hear about all these things. And as I read that, I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting that somebody from the nations would see Israel coming out, and he could have, like many nations in today's world, he could have said, hey, you guys, you really acted kind of high-handedly here. You shouldn't have just destroyed all of Egypt like that. I don't know what you guys were thinking. This is just not the right thing to do. Why did you destroy all these people? You killed all these people. Look what you've done. You've destroyed the whole land of Egypt. You didn't have to do that. Surely there would have been a more peaceable way to make this happen. But no, Jethro doesn't do that. He acknowledges that this was God. This was God's plan, his will, and that it was him who's done all these things, and so he rejoices. And I think I don't know, I kind of found a little bit of an association with that, with Jethro as somebody from outside of Israel coming in and seeing what's happening in Israel today. I'm rejoicing, and I'm saying this is God, like the miracles that have happened, that to for Israel to be reborn and now to be thriving, and to be thriving after 2,000 years of desolation. This is God. This is an incredible, incredible thing that we're seeing come to pass right now. And so I kind of associate with Jethro a little bit, like, wow, it's time to rejoice, and it's time to acknowledge that God exists and is moving mightily. And then we see something really interesting here. Then Jethro goes on to give Moses some advice. Now, this is really pretty interesting deal here, because here's Moses. I mean, he just became basically the most renowned international leader of the time, right? He just did some pretty incredible things in the land of Egypt, and now he's the leader of this huge people that God is with and performing mighty miracles for. But then Jethro comes in and he's like, hey, let me teach you a thing or two here, sonny. And starts telling him, basically kind of critiquing him on the way he's operating. So let's take a little bit of a look at this. Basically, he comes in, he sees Moses is, judging the people all alone, right? And it's really interesting here because you see Moses going and actually bowing down before Jethro when he comes in. So again, just shows the incredible humility of this leader, Moses. He didn't, his reputation was preceding him. He was, a pretty incredible leader. He didn't probably have to, be that humble before Jethro, but he does. And then, Jethro, his father-in-law, starts giving him this advice, tells him, appoint these judges. And so I want to kind of dig in this a little bit, because we're talking about authority here and like setting up the authority structure. And I think this is a really important thing we need to talk about, especially in today's world and Western culture, where it tends to be every man for himself and kind of an anti-authority culture. So what exactly does this look like? Why was this necessary? What was going on here? It's kind of interesting to note in this setup that was going on here, 1 in every 8 adult male Israelites would have been expected to undertake some sort of leadership here. So basically it went from Moses to a huge percentage of the people of Israel that basically became leaders. And we also read later on in Deuteronomy chapter 16 about judges. It says, you shall appoint judges and officers in all of your towns that the Lord your God is giving you according to their tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not pervert justice, you shall not show partiality, and you shall not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. Justice and only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And so here we see that Jethro says, hey, you need to make an authority structure, and actually later on God and Moses agreeing with that, and then God commanding that you shall appoint judges and officers. And so we see here that judges and officers aren't a bad thing, right? We read later in the book of Judges how a lot of people were operating, every man was right in his own eyes, and that wasn't good. So I think we need to realize that having authority and having judges and officers is a very biblical thing that needs to happen if we're going to be serious about following God's ways. And just to put it in a very little way, here we have all the children of Israel coming up and asking Moses questions. Hey, we had this problem, we had this issue, we don't know what to do, what's right? And then Moses would through God's wisdom answer their questions and say, well, the wisest thing to do here, the godly thing to do here is this, and he would help them and work through their problems. And so I guess my question would be that I'm asking myself and that I'm posing to you guys is, who answers your questions? When you have a question about what do you do, how do you walk before God in righteousness? Who answers your questions? Who are you going to? Do you have a mentor? Do you have a leader? Do you have a judge? Do you have this type of role in your life that you can go and ask questions to? This has been something I've really thought about a lot. And, growing up in a big family, there's sort of a natural authority structure that comes into place. And, obviously as a child to parents, there's an authority structure, a natural authority structure there. And so I learned a lot about, authority and have, seen that it's actually a really powerful thing to submit to proper authority and to be accountable, to my brothers, to my dad. And, some people see that as maybe some sort of hindrance or really, a heavy weight and, restrictive. But I found it's actually the exact opposite, that actually having a godly authority structure and a godly accountability actually is very freeing, because then I don't have to depend on myself to make all the big decisions. And it's not like I'm giving all the big decisions over to somebody else, but I'm just working together with somebody to determine those decisions, to make those shifts. One of the biggest ones obviously is getting married. That's a huge decision, and I was so thankful to have my dad involved in that decision, because he knows me really well. He knows how I operate, what I need, what my life goals are, what I feel like God's called me to do, and so he was very instrumental and it was very freeing to me to have his input and to go under his authority, even in that big decision, especially in that big decision. It was very freeing to me. It was not restrictive or felt burdensome at all. And so that's just some examples that I've experienced in authority, and I really feel like maybe we need to take this to a new level. For me, I'm like, okay, so who is my mentor? Who do I go to with questions? Obviously, my dad right now fills a huge role. My brothers in that way. I'm just thinking, even as a body of Messiah, where are we at with this, and are we functioning biblically, in this way? And it's really interesting, actually, in Israel today, they actually have shoftim. They actually have judges. I actually met a guy the other day who said he was a shofet. He was a judge, and so they have like the court system, like the Israeli government, but then even beside that, they have like basically a religious, the people who practice Judaism, they actually go to a religious court and be judged differently, according to the Bible and according to the Jewish traditions, according to Judaism. So it's really kind of an interesting thing. And as I was thinking about that, I thought about in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. It says, when one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? So, if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no standing in the congregation? I say this to your shame. Can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers, but brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers? To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud, even your own brothers. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? So I was reading this, I was like, wow, like this is so powerful. Like we need to be accountable to one another. We need to go before each other as brothers, as believers, and as children of God, going before one another and in a godly accountability, have righteous judgment, and people that can judge between right and wrong in a biblical way, not having to take it to a secular government to deal with our disputes or our questions. And it seems like the big deal here is, would we actually be able to submit to that? That's what I'm thinking. Is like, well, if somebody else told me to do something, am I actually going to submit to that? Or, because that's what happens in today's world. Even if it was a church or whatever that was submitted to some sort of church leadership, if they didn't like it, if they don't like the leadership, they just move on to a different church, and then they submit to theirs until they have a problem there. Then they go somewhere else, and you just kind of run around, until there's a blow up, and then you go somewhere else. There's like no real accountability. And so one of my real heart's desires and prayers is that somehow, as a body of Messiah, we'd be able to be accountable to one another and follow this these guidelines and this thing that's being said here in 1 Corinthians. So jumping back to these judges, because that's really, I think, kind of a big question here, for me, and I think for a lot of us, is so how do you find somebody that's actually trustworthy? I mean, there's been a lot of cults and abuses of, leadership and authority. And so how do you find somebody who you could actually submit to and it's not going to hurt you in the end? That's a huge question. How does this work? And so some of the guidelines that Jethro throws out here is they need to be men of accomplishment. So basically, you need to know what they've done. And they need to be people who have done godly things, who have been upright, who have a good testimony, who are walking upright before God and have actually fruit that they can show for their, as accomplishments. They need to be God-fearing, right? They need to fear God. They need to be, not proud, not arrogant of themselves. They need to fear God and be under authority, right? If they're under God's authority, then they'll be somebody that you can submit to their authority. They need to be men of truth. So they need to be somebody that is really hard line on the truth, following the truth every time, all the time, and who despise money. I thought that was really interesting. Somebody who despises money. I think that's a really, really big deal in today's world. People love money, and people love wealth, and they try to get things and attain wealth. And so this leader has to be somebody who despises money. That one really hit me. Like, wow, that's a really interesting thing to throw in here. To be one of these things that have to be, the prerequisite for a judge, somebody who despises money. And they shall judge the people. So these guys are going to go out there and they're going to settle the disputes. They're going to, hold that place of judging the people. So one kind of question about this is, okay, so wait a second. Moses is the leader, right? He knows what he's doing here. So how come he didn't think about this before? Like, what was he thinking? He's this incredible leader. How come he didn't know what was best or be able to decide what was best on his own? Like, what was going on with him? And so one thought is that Moses, he was such an amazing leader. He wanted to not just judge the people individually, but he wanted to have a relationship with all the people. He wanted to get to know each one, and just the honor that it would give to somebody to actually come in before Moses, this great leader of Israel, to have access to him was a really, really incredible thing. And so that's what Moses was trying to give to all the people. He was trying to make sure that they knew he's not some sort of high and lofty, leader who's ruling over everyone. No, he wanted to be accessible to everyone. He wanted to, be right there with anybody's need. And so they could all come to him and he could talk to them. But when Jethro comes in, Moses realized that if he continued in this way, it wasn't going to be a generational thing, right? Once Moses is gone, then what happens? The whole thing would fall apart. And I see, many groups and movements die out that way. So Moses is like, yes, you're right. I need to be able to delegate out this leadership so that this can be a generational thing, something that's long term. And it really shows the power of mentorship. Because if you can set these judges, like if a huge percentage of the people of Israel all of a sudden become leaders, then they're become teachers, and when you teach, you learn. And when you're learning from somebody every day, somebody that you can relate to, somebody that's not this high leader, but you have that leader that you're relating to every day, every week, whatever. There's a real power in that, and a strength in that. And the Jewish people are incredible at this whole thing. They study together, they interact together. Amazing. That's been one of their secrets of success, and in passing these godly things from generation to generation. It's really interesting here. This part where Jethro comes in and he says that what you do is not good to Moses. It's actually the Hebrew words lo tov. It's not good. It's actually one of only 2 instances in the whole Torah where that word's used. One is where God tells Adam, it's not good for you to be alone. And now here, we have Moses, Jethro telling Moses, hey, it's not good for you to be alone. So we cannot lead alone. We can't live alone. To be alone is not good. We have to have each other. We have to be willing to work with each other, willing to have mentors, willing to be accountable, willing to be in authority over others. We have to be willing to be leaders. And then what's the end of Jethro's thing here? He says, so too, all these people will reach their place in peace. And so originally it looks like, this is for Moses because, he's going to get tired out and worn out. But actually, this is really for the people, that they can reach their place in peace. So then we have this incredible account at Mount Sinai. Moses says, okay, we got to sanctify the camp. We have to get ready. God is coming to meet us. And then there's the thunder and the lightning and the cloud and the shofar that got louder and louder, and fire and smoke. And we see this huge dramatic experience that's happening. Definitely one of the most dramatic things ever in world history is this, Almighty God coming down on this mountain. It's an incredible thing. And God gives the 10 Commandments. And it's kind of interesting that we have this, this story of basically Jethro telling Moses that he needs to develop all these leaderships and delegate out. And then we see God coming in and giving these commandments. That it's kind of interesting, putting these side by side, a contrast here, because basically Jethro is saying Moses, and Moses is agreeing that he can't lead alone. But then you have God Almighty coming down on Mount Sinai and basically saying, okay, I am the God of the universe. I am the only one who rules alone, basically, So it's kind of an interesting contrast between the two stories. And something for us to all take to heart too is like, okay, God's the only one who can rule alone. We all need people. We need leadership, and we need to be leaders. So then we have going through the 10 Commandments. There's a lot here. This is such an incredible Torah portion. I don't really have time to go into much here. But then we have the instructions for building an altar. And essentially we were just in Elam Moreh, and from there you can look over and see Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, Mount of Blessing, Mount of Cursing, and you can actually see Joshua's altar from Elam Moreh. And it's really interesting, it's talking about the ramps and stuff here, as it's talking about, from uncut stones. And that was actually one of the things, as the archaeologist came through and were looking for Joshua's altar. When they found it, this guy was actually an atheist, didn't believe in the Bible or in God, but he found this altar, and he's trying to figure out what in the world it is. He's like, what can this be? So finally he goes back to where he was staying that night, and a Jewish yeshiva student was studying, and he actually had a depiction in one of his books of an altar, and he's like, hey, where'd you find that? And he's like, hey, it's an altar. And they're able to find out that it was actually an altar because of the ramps, because of the uncut stones, because these things, and this atheist actually became a believer in God. So amazing things are happening here in the land of Israel. It's such an amazing time to be alive. So thank you guys so much for listening, and Shabbat Shalom from the beautiful, exceedingly good land of Israel.